Yeah, I don't believe in destiny, I just do what's best for me. Don't listen to my enemies, they're just full of jealousy. Yeah, this legacy, you gon' see what's left of me. You gon' see success in me, you ain't seen the rest of me. I just wanna be the best at what I know, better than the rest, just watch me grow. Put me to the test and watch me go. This is my quest, I'ma make it known. They call me obsessive, oh I know. Call me selective with my notes, call me aggressive with my flow. Call me offensive even though Joe, I ain't gonna lie, life's tough. Try to get by, life's rough. Try to do it right, it's not enough. Even though you try, you still mess up. But I'm still gonna fight for what I love, still gonna die for what I love. Still gonna try, I won't give up. Still gonna fight until I've won. They say I'm way too obsessed and I've got nothing left, and I'm not quite there yet, but those words they'll regret. Cause I've got something left and I'm not giving in. I will not let them win, I won't stop till the end, no. Studied them religiously so I don't repeat history. And people won't admit to me they don't want a victory bad enough to get a C. They'd rather just go leave it be. And this journey I've been on since 13, working hard and learning, never stopping searching. Yeah, it's burning, all this passion hurts me. I took action working, writing down these words. No, I'm not okay, I just wanna be something. I don't wanna be nothing, living all alone. No, I'm not alright, I'm just barely getting right. But I'll tell you I'm just fine, so you leave me alone. They say I'm way too obsessed and I've got nothing left, and I'm not quite there yet, but those words they'll regret. Cause I've got something left and I'm not giving in. I will not let them win, I won't stop till the end, no.
And I'm fucking livid that we are stuck in the timeline where Alex Jones is right. As I said, democracy is a system that reinforces authoritarian ideals.
Why aren't the Amish afraid of COVID? Because they don't have TVs.
They were posting some crazy shit like a month ago. Remember that?
You brought a freaking guillotine.
I did.
Being a victim of a tragedy doesn't make you an expert in public policy. Somebody telling them to stand up for their rights is disinformation. Kind of worse.
Oh no! Oh, okay, no. You want to make the world a better place? Have some babies and raise them to not be stupid.
Man, governments are not going to like this shit.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, activists and people of the internet, have a great evening, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of O'Donnell for Liberty. As always, I'm your host, Justin. Before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and make sure you catch up on all of our past content and future shows as well. If you enjoy what you see, you can become an early supporter of the program by following the Patreon link in the description and signing up to join our production team today. If you want to keep in touch between shows, you can follow me on social media, join our community Discord channel where you can chat with other fans of the show at any time. All those links are in the description as well. And first and foremost, a shout out to our sponsor, Sneck Swag where you can get all your favorite Liberty merch, including some awesome swag that's perfect for the homeschooling mom in your life. They get a whole section of homeschool swag, coffee mugs, tote bags, and t-shirts, because what better way to spread the word about homeschooling than to brag it to your friends. And tonight we're going to be talking about hacking the education system for the benefit of your kids and how to make homeschooling work with a full-time job. So I want you to give me a big welcome, because we're going to take some questions. So make sure you hit the like button, leave some comments, tell us what you think in the chat, and give a huge big welcome to tonight's guest, author, homeschooling mother of 6, and activist extraordinaire, Linsey Knerl. Linsey, thank you for joining us tonight. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you.
So, like, as I built, you are the homeschool mom. You wrote the book Hacking Homeschool, like how to give kids the right education. I don't have kids. I haven't homeschooled anyone. I'm a product of public education myself, and I always found education to be boring. Like, I was not prepared for college when I got to college, because even though I graduated near the top of my class in public school, I had no clue what I was getting into. I didn't learn life skills. How did you what made you make the decision that, as like a mother of 6 with a full-time job, you were going to homeschool?
Well, I'm a public school kid too, and I remember being really bored. I remember being very frustrated. I remember thinking, I'm here for so long. I could do this in just minutes if you would just let me be. And that's kind of how, as someone who married, had kids, just started right away having kids. We had 2 or 3 kids when we started deciding to homeschool, and they've always been homeschooled. But we just were kind of like, we're going to do this for a while because the schools available weren't really making sense for our schedule, for our lifestyle, and see how it goes. And it's like the ball keeps rolling. We kept getting more efficient. We kept getting more excited. There are more opportunities. And, a lot has changed from when you would stick the little CD in the CD-ROM for your kid to do like spelling. And now where you can like have them taking college courses or being tutored one-on-one by, astrophysicists and all these things that are available now. It's just, there's really no excuse to say that you can't make it work as far as the educational portion of it.
I think the boredom and like the lack of time, like that's the big argument here with people and say, I can't homeschool, I have a full-time job. Like, people use public school systems as childcare rather than education. And that's what people will look back on it. And we've seen, at least in the past 18 months, 2020 and 2021 so far, with everything shut down and people being forced to become their own kids' teachers and to homeschool. One of the biggest things I've seen people say online is, I never realized like how little work my kids actually do in school. They're in school for 8 hours a day, but we just finished their entire curriculum in an hour and a half.
Right. And, you don't want to confuse childcare with education. They're not the same thing. There are so many people that have to use the school for childcare, and that isn't this conversation, right? I'm assuming, and this is what's surprising to me, is I've watched people for 18 months wait by their phones every night to find out if tomorrow is the day their kid gets to go back. And I think, what amazing amount of power your school system has over you, that they're going to tell you what you're going to do when you wake up tomorrow morning. Here's something. How about you tell them what you're going to do tomorrow morning? My kid's going to be home. Great. I decided that, not you. And we're going to take the day and we're going to make it ours. And we're going to do what we want to do. I can't imagine being held hostage by a system that can change whenever a number comes out or a politician says something. It's not the way I've lived. And I don't like having that sense of fear and apprehension that tomorrow someone's going to tell me how I get to educate my kid. It doesn't sit right with me.
Right. It's something that's blown my mind here in New Hampshire, where we have a really robust libertarian and anarchist community here in New Hampshire because of the Free State Project, and like homeschooling is something that's always to the forefront. People talk about it constantly because of what a poor reputation public schools have for just a quality of education. And even kids who were in public schools, a lot of their parents in our community would have them doing supplemental homeschool stuff at home just to fill in the gaps of what school wasn't teaching them. But this year, with the whole big push, like the school was the big one, end the lockdown, send the kids back to school. And then it was the same people campaigning to end the lockdowns who didn't send their kids back to school. They were the ones who realized, like, my kids are doing better not in school. And like, it always comes back to, well, you're not going to socialize your kids if you don't have them in school. But there's
my kids have been so social. My kids actually weren't very social. They're the type that would play board games and sit home and like take apart electronics. They're totally happy climbing trees by themselves. But there are 5 boys, so they can hang together. But we were shocked at the number of things in the homeschool community that continued to go on even with lockdowns. They worked out ways to do things virtually. They worked out ways to do things in a park at 500 feet. Archery can be done outside at a very long distance, and it meets the protocol. So my kids were still socializing, not to what maybe they had expected and wanted to, but we were figuring out a system when the rest of the world was kind of just holding their breath and waiting to be given permission. We have been hacking the system for years. So this was just another bump in the road for a lot of us. And I don't think our children felt it in the same way because of that.
Well, that's one thing I have seen with the homeschoolers that I do know, and most of my friends homeschool their kids. If their kids aren't homeschooled, they're in like a Montessori school or like specialized private education. Or I have a good friend who works as a private tutor. He doesn't work for a school, but he's a full-time teacher to people who want to homeschool their kids, and it works out phenomenally as long as people recognize that they can do it and take the step to do it. And the like socialization of kids, I think it's as simple as recognizing that if you're homeschooling, you're not the only one homeschooling. So reach out to other parents who are homeschooling. And that's come back to the childcare aspect of things too, where it's like, okay, yeah, I got to work a full-time job. I can teach the kids on Tuesday. My neighbor can handle them on Wednesday, and work it out with your community to form your own little communities.
It's funny because we have this saying, it takes a village, right? And it's the saying that they tell us when they tell us we need to put our kids in public school. And yet it hasn't been the village for a very long time. We've kind of allowed it to get out of our hands. We've seen, though, with this pandemic thing that the village is kind of stepping in again. Neighbors are helping neighbors, and parents are saying, I work nights, you work days. I mean, that's how my husband did it. There wasn't some insane amount of privilege with us as like a one income family. It's always just been my husband works opposite as me, and we make it work. But as far as the village thing, this is when you see this happening, and it's not happening in a brick building. It's happening with neighbors and volunteer groups and like-minded people behind, like the Libertarian movement, or people that just say, hey, we have the same values. Let's get our kids together and do some fun stuff. And that works out amazingly well.
Yeah. And I've asked some parents about it locally, like, what are you guys doing for homeschooling? And I had a friend, she takes her son, it's an hour drive. But there's a local farm that lets the kids go work on the farm and actually do work for the day. And that's education, because they're learning how the farm runs. They're learning how to take care of the animals. And like, it may not be your pre-algebra or your calculus, but it's meaningful work and it's meaningful education that's going to help them later on in life. I know an 11-year-old who beats me at chess, because she didn't know how to play chess a year and a half ago. But she sat down, we taught her how to play chess, and now she smokes me with it, because just constantly learning about probability and planning and stuff like that. And there's a lot more that can be considered education than just your traditional workbooks and doing like schoolwork. And I feel like schoolwork leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. There's always this like nagging thing, like, oh, are we missing something? Because when you homeschool, you're pulling back all that responsibility, and you're taking this level of ownership that culturally hasn't really been very accepted. If you fail, if your kids fail, people get to point the finger and go, oh man, look at those weird homeschoolers and the kids that don't know how to do anything. People don't really do that when they graduate from public school, not having been able to read or do anything. But for some reason, everyone, the eyes are on all the homeschoolers. And so there is that kind of fear. And it runs through my head every night, because I am trying to pace 5 kids to finish. And so the ones that want to go to trade school can go to trade school, and the ones that want to do college can do college. And in my mind, it's almost like 5 games of chess where I'm thinking, okay, This kid has to study for this test, ACT. This kid wants to do, I'm a guidance counselor for all these kids. And I know that it fully rests on my husband and I's shoulders to make sure these things happen. But at the same time, the flexibility and the way, when they canceled all the ACTs and the kids just couldn't use them, we found out about the CLT, which was a completely different test that could be remotely proctored that a lot of really good schools are accepting. And so you learn to kind of pivot and figure things out. And it really rewards innovation and disruption. And people that value that are going to do well. And people that are a little foreign to that idea are going to need a little confidence boost. And that's kind of why people like me are out here. But it can be amazing for the right mindset.
Now, how do you push people to take that leap, though? Because it is a leap. It's something they're not used to. Like people who were raised through the public education system themselves. They saw all their siblings, all their family through the public education system, and they don't know homeschoolers. They don't know how easy it can be. With the exception of a global pandemic forcing it upon them, how do you get people to take the leap full time?
Well, you don't always. And that's why this is such an amazing time. Like I tell people, you do it now, try it. If you screw it up, you can't do it worse than what's going on. No, you just can't. People are miserable. Even in the best schools, you've got school boards and people shouting and people getting arrested, and you've got kids crying because they want to wear a mask and kids crying because they don't want to wear a mask. And it's become so highly politicized that it's not school anymore. And even the best schools with the best teachers that are trying so hard are being pushed from these opposing forces. And they can't even do the job that they want to do. And we're seeing like large amounts of teachers leaving. We don't have bus drivers. We're calling in the National Guard. I mean, what a weird time to live in. Homeschool now. If you, for some reason, just completely suck and the world turns back to normalcy, you can put them back in. But really, what do you have to lose right now? I see nothing. When National Guard is driving the school bus, you have nothing to lose. Like, give it a try.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the schools have phoned it in, at least the people that the schools rely on to run, because it's not just National Guard running school buses. In some states, they're manning the cafeterias. They're pulling up the supply units because nobody's going back to work. Or like if people, a lot of the support staff in public schools tend to be retired people who are just looking for part-time work. And now like the risk to them to go out during a pandemic isn't worth the little bit of extra pay they got to work in the cafeteria part-time or to drive the bus part-time. And so they've just called it quits and went on with their retirement.
Yeah. And, I also think if you're thinking you can't do it, a lot of it is because we've been told that like education is this very like elite organization of people that have gone to school for a very long time and have learned all this methodology. And there are some teachers that, I mean, they do know the methodology and they do very well. A lot of them are allowed to use it in schools because it's so cookie cutter. But when you see advertisements for teaching jobs, substitute teaching jobs, where they don't even require a degree. And in full disclosure, I don't have a degree. They say 60 hours in a psychology class, and you can teach this school. I think, okay, now the bar is so low in the sense of what we need to be able to staff schools that you can no longer look at someone like me with 60 hours of college credits and say, who are you to teach your kid? You don't know education. We're really to this place where we're running out of excuses. If you want to homeschool, like we're running out of excuses because they're all just kind of falling like dominoes in front of us.
So I feel like the advanced education is incredibly overvalued. I have an advanced degree and I haven't used it. Like I found better income opportunities not using my degree than were ever available using my degree. And it turns out like I was good at those things. So I stuck with it. And I look back on things and I wish I started working 6 years earlier instead of spending the time in college. But even with my advanced degree, I wouldn't be able to teach kids basic things like mathematics. I wouldn't know how to run that classroom in a way that the Department of Education would approve of. And I think that's something that really bothers me about public education that you touched on there is it's so cookie cutter. Like the No Child Left Behind Act also meant no child could excel. So it was treating every kid as if they were equal when they just aren't. And it's just like every kid needs a tailored approach to me. And like at treating everyone equally, you're going to get kids left behind because they can't keep up. And you're going to get kids held behind because they're not allowed to thrive. But as a homeschooling parent, you're not held to those standards. You can teach your kids how it best serves them.
Right. And, what's interesting is the group that I think embraces homeschooling the most and has the easiest transition are people that are already advocating for special needs children. So those people are kind of already in the school system saying, hey, this is what my kids should be getting. This is what they're entitled to get. This is what we need. And a lot of them are already doing so much of the pushing that there's a lesson to be learned from that group of parents. And they are also some of the very first to bring their kids home when schools were closed. So if you can just kind of think of yourself as that parent that's pushing for the resources your kid needs, only you don't have to push against an infrastructure that exists that may be inflexible and have limited funds, but you're just getting online and finding like the teacher that you need. It's very simplified and it is very doable.
Yeah, and there was a comment in chat from Robert Daniel, who I know Robert, and he's who I mentioned. He's a teacher. He's great. He doesn't work in the school system, but he says one size fits few.
Yeah.
And that really is it. And I've campaigned for a public office on a platform of abolishing government agencies. And that seems really radical to people. But I found like when I actually got the chance to talk to your suburban parents about the problems with specifically things that affected them, the Department of Education was always the big one. And it always comes down to nobody knows how to raise your kids better than you. And education should be best left in the hands of the teachers and the parents, not a nameless bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., who thinks they know how your kids should learn.
You know, it's weird because that is a very radical concept in hindsight. But this year,
right,
we're seeing people that I swear to you wouldn't know. I mean, it's blowing my mind that they're like, well, what is this Department of Education? And do we even need it? And I'm thinking, now you're getting you're getting into things that would have gotten me, kicked out of places before. But yeah, this is like, it seems like it's not serving us, right? And so when things don't serve us and we pay for it, we automatically go, why do we even have this? And I think this is the first time in as long as I've been alive that people have started to ask questions like, do we even need this thing? When you take something away from somebody and you tell them they can't have it, but you have to keep paying for it,
right?
They don't like that very much. They start to question things. And I don't know if I don't think people thought this through very well when they started kind of getting behind the scenes on some of this education stuff, because parents just aren't having it right now.
I wonder if your average parent of a public school child would feel better about the idea of homeschooling if they actually got an itemized bill about how much of their property taxes went to what within the school district. And then 5% went to pay your son's teachers. What would the rest go to? Pensions for the retired teachers, or administration staff, or bureaucratic BS. I think for every dollar in taxes that gets sent to the Department of Education, only about 73 cents makes it back to the local school district. And the school district has to spend most of that complying with regulations from the Department of Education. So none of your money actually gets spent on your kids. So unfortunately, in most states, you can't opt out of the taxes. You still have to pay for the school, even if you are homeschooling.
Right. And I know it's kind of a big thing right now to be like, money should follow the student. There's a lot of talk like that. Yep. I just think they shouldn't have my money
in the first place.
Because when they give you your own money back, there's usually rules attached. And I know that Homeschool Legal Defense and some of these other groups that kind of advocate for homeschoolers are kind of saying, you know what, we really don't necessarily, not to put words in their mouth, but in the past we've said, no, that's okay. We don't really want the money as tax credits or this or that, because now you get to tell us what we can teach in a lot of instances. And while I hate getting that tax bill, I also really, really like having me be exempt from that and saying, nope, I'm opting out of this system entirely until we get something resolved, because I don't want you to tell me what I can and can't teach.
Yeah, Robert, again, in the comments, he brings up the education freedom accounts. Yay. And that's something I do want to give a lot of props and shout out to the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. They are a nonprofit organization that does lobbying on state level politics here in New Hampshire. And a lot of their endorsed representatives got behind. And we managed over the past few years to not only get true education savings accounts and true education freedom accounts where the money can follow the students when parents pull them out of public school, whether that's to go to a private school, a charter school, a parochial school, or homeschooling. Homeschooling parents can now get their money back. But this year is the first year for homeschooling in New Hampshire. I believe it's the first year where there is no requirement to submit an approved curriculum.
Oh, that's always excellent. I mean, I'd love if we didn't have to ask anything, but that no approved curriculum. I live in a state that's pretty, we send them our forms and you can say, get as detailed as you want, or you can go, we're going to get books from the library. So, I mean, it's easy peasy, but still a little more oversight than I would love no oversight, but that's me.
Yeah, I saw somebody had shared the homeschool enrollment form on Facebook earlier today, like getting out to people in the community. It's like, remember the deadline to turn it in is coming up, and it's like 3 lines. It's like, I'm homeschooling my kids. Like, I would like to apply for the financial assistance, or I wouldn't. Or
Cool.
Thank you, I'm homeschooling my kids. Reminder. Like, there's no requirement for a curriculum. There's no state oversight. It's like, because of the efforts of these organizations in New Hampshire, and it's taken a long time. I've lived in New Hampshire for 5-6 years myself, and when I moved, we didn't have these, and they were still working on them back then for years before I even moved. So it's an uphill road to support homeschoolers across the country, but I think the second uphill road is to get them to reduce your property taxes so you can, like you said, just keep your money to begin with.
Yeah, another quandary for another show, maybe.
Right. So what kind of tips do you have for parents who are getting new into homeschooling? Because there is a lot of people who it was forced on them this year. People who didn't necessarily want to homeschool, who were fine with the public education system, but now all of a sudden, school is their kids sitting in the living room on Zoom, and they're doing most of the work anyways. What kind of tips do you have for them to, like, maybe make it easier on themselves because they are working full time, finding the time to do everything, and still managing to make sure their children get a good education?
Sure. So first, and this was harder to do, 15 years ago, before internet. And I mean, we had internet, but it was we had MySpace, I think. I don't remember any MySpace homeschool groups, but you had to, just assume that the only other homeschooler that you knew, you had to do it like them, right? Because they kind of blaze that trail. I would say identify people that hold the same values as you, because it used to be long ago, all homeschoolers kind of were of the same, religious beliefs or political beliefs or this or that. They all were okay with the same curriculum. I have curriculum choices that wouldn't be okay for the next person. I want my kids to read, the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, and Mein Kampf. I want them to read all of it and learn all of it and see all of it. And then there are some parents that are like, oh, that's too much for my kid. I don't, and that is why it's parent-led education, because you get to decide. So find other homeschoolers that have some of the same values you do in life, in how they live life, whether that's politics or volunteerism, if their faith is important to them, and ask them what they do. Because the worst thing for me was going to another homeschool parent and saying, what curriculum do I pick? And they say, this is awesome, we're all using it. And then I pay all that money and I bring it home and I'm like, I have some problems with this. There's so many more options now where you can find things that kind of match up with how you want your children to learn. You don't want to pull them from a school where you didn't believe in what they were being taught and then sit them home and teach them the same thing, but just you telling them to read it instead of a teacher. So you do have to do a little digging, and then just pick one subject. I know that sounds simple, but pick something that's not difficult, something that the kid likes. For one kid, that might be science. Another kid, it might be literature. Kid might just want to take apart electronics. So you get them like an electronics course. Start with something they're going to like and get them excited and with the good feeling about education, because they're probably going to have some pretty yucky feelings around learning if they've come out of this mess that's school right now. And they're going to almost need to be like reacclimated, and that's going to be the hardest part.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be expensive. I know you mentioned paying all this money for these curriculums to find out you don't like them, but like you have places like Khan Academy that just offers it for free. And it's just available out there. And like, if you don't mind political type of stuff, like the Ron Paul curriculum isn't that expensive, and it's out there for people. But I think that's a big driver to get to people is like the quote unquote brainwashing in public schools of children. A lot of people have a problem with it. A lot of people complain about it. It's like, oh, they're teaching critical race theory, so pull your kids out of school. Oh, they're teaching kids communism and socialism, so pull your kids out of school. Like, if you don't want your kids to learn that stuff, it's on you to teach them the alternative.
And with that, there are a
Yep.
lot of homeschool curriculums that have critical race theory units that they are buying for their children to learn at home. Every person with every belief is homeschooling right now. So the key is to find your people, because while I absolutely think it's great, any parent wants to homeschool their kid, you can't just assume because someone's a homeschooler, they're going to be able to share books and tips, maybe recipes. But even that, if you don't eat meat, I can't help you. We're just, you have to find people that are going to accept you for the values you want to pass on to your children. And that can take a little time. In the meantime, though, put them on Khan Academy and just kind of get them de-schooled from the experiences that they've had, which I think are probably pretty weird right now for a lot of them, compared to how I remember with the social distancing and all the things that just seem very weird to me right now.
No, I mean, your kids have never been in public school. Like, you've homeschooled from the get-go, which is incredible. But like, I think back to my time in public school, and I remember, and I'm not ashamed to admit it because I've grown as a person, but I was kind of a bully in high school. And we had homeschooled kids who would come do sports because they were still eligible to participate in the sports teams, even though they're homeschooled in town. And we just made fun of them, bullied them. It was like, oh, the homeschooled kids, they're the weirdos. Like, how can you like get kids over the fear of like social persecution from other kids?
Sure.
Especially if they're like high school age and you're pulling them out of school.
So you have two issues here. One,
Yep.
you have to ask why you're taking your kid out of the school,
Mhm.
and if that's something that is worth putting them back in for sports or hobbies. If the person who was not a good teacher is also now the coach, I would ask, what are we doing? Because there are homeschool sports programs and school associated sports programs in just about everything. So my kid can play football. My kid did volleyball. They have nationals, they have regionals, they have scholarships, they have all the things. But if you want to do that, there are bully homeschoolers too. I guess I haven't met a lot of them because parents, I wouldn't say they're always around, but there's a little more accountability because we kind of know people are watching us and looking at us, and we don't want our kids to be the jerks. But the other thing is, man, when you start equipping your kids with things like natural rights and they start learning about these things, they kind of get fierce and they don't care. And that's just honest. Like, I put my kids in speech and debate, which, my kid was like, oh, debate. And then, by the end of the year, he was like, right to know, mom. Like, well, they're not going to tell me what to do. So I feel like there's some power in that overcomes, and homeschool kids can be very confident, and homeschool kids can, they can make it in a way that's very different when they're the first kid in their dorm room to do a little laundry on their own because they've been doing their laundry. There's kind of some like, you get to be kind of the big kid on campus when you can function and you know how to do things. So if you're not the weird, awkward homeschooler that I haven't seen in about 20 years, there's some power in it, I think.
Right. Again, I was in high school before the age of Facebook and social media, so the only time we did see them was when they'd show up for practice. They were the weird kids who never interacted. But what you just said there, like, it makes me think of a scene from an incredible movie that features homeschooling. Homeschooling is not the point of the movie, but all the characters, the kids in the movie are homeschooled. It's called Captain Fantastic.
I know what clip you're
Viggo
talking
Mortensen.
about.
Yeah. Where like Viggo Mortensen's character, he calls down his sister-in-law's kids, and he's like, to prove a point, he asked the teenagers if they can tell him what the Bill of Rights are, and the teenagers couldn't do it. So then he asked his 6-year-old, and she can recite the entirety of the Bill of Rights and gives an argument about what they mean and why they're important. Like, equipping kids can help them overcome anything that they're actually faced with, as long as you give them what they need to overcome them with.
And I was a kid that was bullied in school. I was like wearing size 2 clothing in the 3rd grade. I was tiny. And, I was kind of nerdy, weird, learned to read early, socially awkward. Probably didn't know at the time. Homeschooling could have made me a little less weird because I could have found like my group. But I survived. I just feel like a lot of time was wasted and didn't want that for my kids. So.
Yeah. And I mean, that's back to the whole thing. Like, a lot of what is in school is wasted. Like, if you were to dedicate the 8 hours a day to actual education and homeschooling, like how much more advanced would your kids be over their peers in public schools?
Well, and
in
then
your estimation.
Yeah, do 4 hours. It's so funny because my kids get done and they're like, it's been 2.5, 3 hours. And if you go to Khan Academy's website, they built this beautiful little resource for parents who had their kids home from school that were like, how long do I need to spend? And, the Khan site was like, for little kids, 40 minutes to an hour and a half. High schoolers, 3.5 hours. They can't take more into their brains. The rest is usually spent, going back and forth to lunch. Maybe if they have PE still in their school or recess, they're doing that. But like sitting there stuffing their brain full of information, that should never go over a couple hours. And, my kids spend most of their school time reading because a lot of their stuff, we use a lot of source material. It takes a lot of time to get through those books.
They don't need to be stuck at an uncomfortable desk in a crowded room to read.
No.
They can do it on the couch. They can do it on bed. Like I read in bed every night. It's a more comfortable place and I absorb more. And if I sit at my desk here and I read something, I'm going to forget it in 10 minutes because I wasn't comfortable.
Right.
And I think it was Michael Malice who said it. It's like schools are just prisons for kids. It's like it's a hostile environment. So even if you're teaching them, like if they're uncomfortable where they are, they're not going to absorb what they would if they were comfortable.
It's weird because growing up in it, I wouldn't have thought that, we had friends with older siblings who made us watch Pink Floyd, The Wall video. We just thought it was the dumbest thing ever, right? But now having not been in it in 15 years, it feels really weird to me. My kids will go to activities or graduations or things where they'll walk into the school building or they have to take their ACT and they're just like, kids sit here and do this. I'm like, yeah, like this is how they learn. And even in colleges, you get a little more space, a little more freedom, and you have, you have a way of kind of figuring out your day and how your schedule is going to work. And so the school, it to me feels not like real life, and how people live and learn and grow and work. And as an entrepreneur, I can especially say that because I've left the 9-to-5 cubicle for quite a while too.
I never took an online class or anything until I got to college. And like, I really wish that stuff was available to me in high school and earlier, just like in hindsight, because of like how easy I did find it and how much more I observed and learned in an online class, not because like the format, but because I was able to go at my own pace.
Right.
And I remember I had signed up for a microeconomics class. Then it was an online class, and the teacher like had the link. She prepared everything, and here's the scheduled exams of when you would take your tests. And I emailed the teacher like 3 days after the semester started, and like, so I made it through all the material this weekend. Like, how does this work? Like, she's like, oh, here's your final exam. And it was 4 days for a semester's worth of microeconomics at a state-funded college.
Yeah, sorry. That's pretty common.
Well, like, I just imagine like how much more could we learn if like the education was structured to the way people do learn, instead of just assuming that a classroom is the best environment.
Definitely. And, with kids, I started 2 kids in the same grade, and I thought this will be convenient. They're 18 months apart. And by the end of it, I was like, okay, one kid isn't going as fast as he needs to go. The other kid's frustrated, doesn't want to be outdone by his younger brother. We're going to separate them, do completely separate modules so they're not comparing. And we're just going to like turn up the gas, see how far they can take this. And it's been fun watching them. Just like parenting and joy. People say it's a certain way, but when you get to like watch them and give them the tools and just see them go, like it's a new level for me, I think. And I think it makes it enjoyable to parent them.
Yeah. Now, do you do anything with your kids like other than traditional, like non-traditional kind of education? Like, let's go to the farm. You're working on the farm for the day, or like cleaning up, like life skills, like, hey, I got to balance my checkbook, come over and like do it.
Sure. Well, we live on a 4-acre homestead, and my kids do the farm thing every day, and they say they hate it, but they learn so much. So we've got chickens, gardens, orchard. They picked apples all day yesterday, and then my one son, he hurt his foot and he got out of the chores, so he sat and cut apples with mom, and we made apple cider last night till late in the hours while he worked on his debate negative case or whatever. So, I mean, there's always something like that going on. My kids volunteer at summer camp, helping younger kids. They, we try to go help. They spent part of the summer helping somebody dig out a basement by hand. It's just, we've done all sorts of things, but really, when they say they want to learn about something, or usually what it is I catch them watching something weird on YouTube and I go, do we need to investigate this a little more? And then I'm like, instead of watching some like streamer talk about this who may or may not know what he's talking about, let's like find you somebody who does this for a living. And then we do a lot of like setting them up with email so that they can email questions about the person's job, or they can hop on a Zoom and talk about what the person does, or they can job shadow. So that's a really exciting aspect of homeschooling too.
So that's awesome. Like the actual like workplace education, but like when you're a kid, like how many kids graduate high school nowadays that are not prepared to work whatsoever? Or how many kids fail to graduate high school but have no other option because public school didn't teach them anything? Like I often wonder, like, how many people today are like in financial trouble and financially struggling and unable to make ends meet because nobody in high school ever taught them how to balance a checkbook, because nobody in high school ever taught them how to open a bank account. Nobody in high school ever taught them how to set up auto pay for their bills so they didn't get behind on things and get their heat shut off in the middle of the winter. Like very basic stuff that kids aren't set up to be prepared for.
Well, it's funny because we did a lot of the personal finance, and they're not going to remember how to write a check. It doesn't matter because it's going to be 20 years between each check that they write. I will tell you that. But when the stonks thing was like going crazy on Twitter, right? The kids, they see these things and they're like, "What's this?" And we got this personal finance lab, which is like a thing you can get a membership for, and it takes them 10 weeks through like a simulated stock experiment, as well as showing them like, here's what happens, kind of like Monopoly, but like if you spend credit cards, here's what's going to happen, and And so, there's a lot of just really cool, not even semester long, like experimental learning modules kids can get into for not very much money that gives them kind of a taste of it. And if you don't like it, you don't have to keep using it. That's the beauty of it if it doesn't work, which in schools, when they invest in some curriculum or have some expert come in and do a 3-year behavior modification plan, like they have to use it because they've just spent all that money. But with you can try something for 30 days on a trial and be like, yeah, that didn't work for us, and stop wasting time. Stop throwing bad money after good, after bad, after good, after bad. Like you can make decisions. And that's pretty awesome.
It sounds a lot less risky than just getting each of them a Robinhood account and seeing what happens too.
Oh dear. Yeah, we avoided that. No, Mom said no on the Robinhood accounts.
No, that honestly, I think that was the best part I did take away from my education, both high school and collegiate. And one of my collegiate classes, a business economics class that I had nothing to do with my major. My major was emergency management and homeland security. But like I had to take a business economics unit in college. But the teacher actually had us all set up Fidelity and Ameritrade investing accounts and dropped $300 in as part of our course. And whoever had the most money at the end of the semester got a whole letter grade bump. And I think that alone is what made me a risk-averse investor, because I wasn't a rich kid in college. I'm like, $300 is a lot of fucking money. Like,
oh yeah.
Like I don't want to lose this before the end of the semester. So it like the real world stuff, and I think that's the only example I can remember from my education of a real world education.
Yeah, a lot is changing. That's one thing with the college. My husband has 2 degrees, doesn't use them. My daughter graduated and was able to find a job right out of college. Always have been homeschooled, never been in public school. But, we try to look for schools where we're like, are you going to actually get to do some of the things you're going to do out in the real world? So they did have her do like social media simulations because she was getting into marketing. But, it's at least if you like it, at least before you get out there. But with homeschool, you don't even have to wait till college. You can try all these things still in high school to some degree, decide if you even need the 4-year or if it's going to be more of like a trades 2-year apprenticeship or something. So you can play around, save some money on that degree that you just look back and go, yeah, I didn't even really want to do that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how how we pressure 18-year-old kids who have no clue what they want to do with their future to take on tens of thousands of dollars of debt for something they think they might want to change their mind on later.
Right.
So I wish there was an alternative for a college degree. I wish the marketplace of employment would recognize that college degrees aren't the end all be all, and we could move to actual real world education and on the job training and stuff like homeschooling, but for actual jobs.
I think it's coming. You know, what happens when you take a bunch of people and you let them make their own decisions and do weird things is they create weird things and solve problems. So I think maybe some of these kids coming up will be doing some exciting stuff. So.
Well, I had a post on LinkedIn that got a little bit of traction yesterday where I expounded. I'm like, I think one of the biggest and best unrealized side effects of COVID-19 and the pandemic and the lockdowns and all that is corporate America realizing that people can work from home. Mm-hmm. And it's really revolutionized like multiple industries. Like I work in the healthcare and the health insurance industry. I haven't stepped foot in the office in 18 months.
Right.
And I've been more productive. I find out that like, oh, I'm done with all my cases for the day and it's 2 p.m. Like nothing else to do. And like it gives me time to work on other projects that I enjoy, get into more entrepreneurial stuff. I'm writing another book because I have the time because of things that have happened. And I think that translates down to the most basic level, to elementary education for kids when they're not stuck in a classroom all day learning nothing. They have the time to actually develop and learn what they want. So maybe your homeschooled kids are 18 and mature enough to know what they want to do moving forward. So college isn't a waste of money for them.
Right. And there's kind of like this trend in homeschooling with like redshirting kids. So you know how like if you got into school at 4 or 5, you're graduating high school like 17, 18, which is super young. You can't sign a contract. You can't even get a credit card. Like you have no business really going, like you said, going out and deciding what you're going to be for the rest of your life. But with homeschooling, we're seeing a lot of the kids be a little bit older. My kids are a little bit older, 18 and 19 when they're graduating high school, which they kind of push back on. But I'm like, guys, look, though, you can like, actually go out and do things legally. You can't, mom can't drive down and like save you from this thing. Like you have to be able to, be able to open accounts on your own, or, taking out all these loans when you're a child doesn't make any sense. So there's a maturity, especially with the boys that I've seen, that kind of between the ages of 17 and 19, like their brains just fully engage. And for us, it's worked out really, really well. They're way more mature because of the homeschooling thing also, but because we're not forcing kids out at like 16 and 17 to go try to like hang out on the college scene and like go from Xbox, nothing past, midnight to like, okay, now you're on your own. You can do whatever you want. That's such a huge shift. A lot of kids don't do well with it. A couple more years cooking at home is not the worst thing.
Yeah, no. And it's something that's really undervalued, at least for like college level education, moving beyond homeschooling past what homeschooling can do, because the piece of paper matters at some point. But when it comes to college level education, myself and my sister are less than a year apart. But because of where our birthdays are, I was started in school a year before her. So even though we are the same age, we have all the same friends and grew up like together, I started in a school a year before her just because of the enrollment rules in Massachusetts. And I graduated a year before her. I went to college because that's what the guidance department told me to do. I was so miserable my freshman year of college and like not doing well in classes because I wasn't engaged. Like I graduated in the top 20 in my high school class and then was almost failing out of my freshman year of college just because I wasn't prepared or ready for it. I learned real quick and I graduated with a very high GPA by the end of my 6-year program. But my sister just took one look at how miserable I was, decided she wasn't going to college. She enrolled in the community college part-time, got a job, lived at home, kept getting homemade meals every night.
Right.
And ended up graduating before me.
That's cool.
With no debt.
Cool for her anyway.
Right, yeah. But like I feel like those stories need to be told to kids. Like it's just because like your public school guidance system says you have to go to college, just because TV says you have to go to college to succeed, it's not the case. It's not even the case you have to be in public school to succeed. And I think a lot of the pressure from like television and media and social media is what gets to kids, telling them that they need to fit a mold to succeed. And the only way to break that mold is homeschooling and breaking your kids from the brainwashing of the mass and like what their peers and their fellow students and the teachers are telling them they have to do to succeed. And I wish we could do more. Like I said, I live in a community where almost everyone I know homeschools their kids. And that was before the pandemic.
Wow.
And it's incredible. And I look at these kids and I interact with these kids. I interact with an 11-year-old who beats me at chess. I interact with a 9-year-old who plays Magic the Gathering, which is the most complex game ever made. And he understands all the rules and he can play along with us. Most of these kids are reading at collegiate levels by the time they're 12 years old. And they can carry on a conversation with all the adults. I got in a political debate with a 12-year-old last year.
It happens all the time, good or bad.
like I had a 12-year-old going on about, like you mentioned earlier, natural rights and how the government didn't have the right to tell him what he could and couldn't do. And it was great. Like I wish I see that as the future for our country, because if we don't impart our values on kids, if we don't impart education that's actually going to help kids on kids, they're just going to be reliant. And as someone whose life mission is to reduce government and reduce people's reliance on government, I think it starts with setting up kids to succeed without government help.
Yeah, I mean, agreed. And also just it's going to take time, but things are moving, and I think they're moving faster than some people are comfortable with, which is how you know that it's working. Right. Because we're going to probably see some pushback on homeschool after all this settles, which is why, we kind of have to know where we stand with things. Sounds like there are great things happening in your state. I've seen some things happen in other states. Some states are lacking, my own state, sadly, but we'll get there.
All right. Now, one other thing I definitely wanted to touch on with you is, let me bring it up. You wrote a book, Homeschool Hacks, How to Give Your Kid a Great Education Without Losing Your Job or Your Mind, which is the most important part there. What drove you to finally write this book and make sure you could get the message out to not just you and your community, but to everyone about how to deal with homeschooling?
Sure. So I wrote it 8 years ago, actually, and they didn't want it.
Why would they?
Well, because they're like, oh, you writing a book for working moms. Moms don't work. And if they do, they're not going to homeschool. So I was like, okay, whatever. And I put it away and I wrote some horrible fiction that didn't sell either. And then the pandemic came along and I was like, people are homeschooling now. Maybe they're ready. So did the agent thing, got the publisher, really quick refined it because now it's kind of outdated, right? 8 years. Right. Interviewed some people, got some up-to-date stuff in there in 2 months, got it out. And, it's interesting because it doesn't really fit. It's not a faith-based book. It's not following some kind of fad or trend or educational ideology. It's just, I need to get my kid out of school. What do I do? Right. So I tried to make it it's accessible as possible. And just to let people know you don't need permission to do this and you are the right person. If you've raised your kid to the age of being able to go to school and they can wipe their bottom and they know how to use a fork, and they can sass mouth on the bus, because I've heard a lot of these kids, then you've taught them enough that you can homeschool them. And parents need to remember that they are their child's primary educator no matter what. It's just how much involvement do you want in that process? So that was kind of the thought behind it.
And I feel like it's really important to get that out there because you're telling it from a place of experience. You're not writing an academic book as an instruction manual to homeschool. You're writing hey, I did it, so can you.
Exactly.
And I feel like that's what a lot of people really need to hear, because to what we talked about way at the beginning an hour ago, everyone thinks it's hard. Everyone thinks they don't have the time. Everyone wonders how it's even possible. If they're not a one-income family, how are they going to pull it off?
It's a challenge, right? But it's the right kind of challenge. There's a lot of things we take upon ourselves that have very little return on investment. Guys, I'm telling you, if you homeschool your kid, you're going to see that work pay off in ways that you don't even know till you're looking at it. And you're just like, this is beautiful. Right.
All right. So where can people follow up with you and learn more about what you are doing?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter at @Knerl. And my website's just linseyknerl.com. So either of those two places you can find me, and I like to engage online and answer questions. And if you're struggling to find like the thing that fits your values for curriculum or a group, let me know. I've heard and seen it all. I could probably like match make you with like the right homeschool community. So
all right. And if you guys are checking in the links in the description of this video, if you're watching it live or if you're following up on Odyssey or Spotify or any of the other platforms that we're on tomorrow, Linsey's links are in the description. You can check out her website. You can get a copy of her book there, and you can follow her on Twitter, like she said, at @Knerl, and ask her any questions you have. But is there anything else you want to leave people with tonight?
no, just if you've ever thought about it, even just like a daydream, now's the time. Like if the risk is so like now's the time. You can mess around, you can figure it out, no one's gonna judge you. You can do this.
All right. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on, Linsey. Until next time, everybody, be free. Thanks again for tuning in and joining the show tonight. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and keep up to date with future shows. Leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts about the show tonight. If you enjoyed the show, you can join our production team over on Patreon by following the link in the description. And don't forget to join our community Discord channel to keep in touch between shows. The best part of all of this is the community that we build around it. And thanks once again to our awesome sponsors and fantastic patrons for helping to keep this show going. If you can't catch the show live, you can always check them out the next day on YouTube, Odyssey, Spotify, Apple Podcast Breaker, and all your other favorite podcatchers. So until next time, everyone, be free.